Finally happening! Yes, I know many of you already know, but as a reminder, before we get into the main topic of this video, PreachCon tickets go on sale on Saturday. Yes, they do, 7 p.m. That's GMT London time. Finally, after 2 long years of having to put it off, delay it, it's finally coming back. We are going to be having PreachCon 2022. I cannot wait, guys. So the tickets go on sale at 7 p.m. on Saturday. That's the 11th, all right? That is tomorrow. It's going to be huge. It's going to be huge. This one's going to be a little different. If you're new to the channel, you're like, what the hell is PreachCon? Is it some sort of egotistical, self-rubbing thing? No, it's not at all. It's an event, a live show that we put on here in the UK. It's going to be in Manchester, where we invite a bunch of content creators down. We do a live stage show. It's not streamed because we do some stuff that's like a little bit beyond the TOS just to have some fun. And we get a lot of audience participation. But essentially, it's a great way of everybody meeting people from the community. And we just have had marriages come from it, babies have come from it, like lifelong friendships have come from it, and it's an event that we had annually up until COVID, and now we can finally do it again. So I really look forward to seeing you guys again. I hope you get yourselves a ticket. It typically sells out in like a couple of minutes, so we really hope to see you there. Just a reminder that the tickets go on sale tomorrow, on Saturday, the 11th, whenever you're watching this at 7 p.m. We'll be streaming it live on Twitch. The link will go out so people can get their tickets, and it should be a hell of a lot of fun. On top of that, we are hosting... This is a big deal for me, man. This is a really big deal. We are hosting a PvP tournament, like for the Questalin. The Questalin Cup is what we call it. It's the Crystalline Conflict in Final Fantasy 14 on June 25th. We're going to be giving away all these chairs. We've got tons of stuff to give away to people and to the winners. This is our first thing we're running like from the studio. That's why I'm so excited from it. We're actually having a production. We're gonna have some casters down. We're gonna make a day of it. It should be like 4 or 5 hours long. It's gonna be on June 25th. I cannot wait for this. We've put tons of effort into it. We think it's gonna be really cool, and we think it's just a great way of getting the community into tournaments in Final Fantasy and to do things beyond, like we've done with the stage play, like we do with the crawlers every single day, is to take the elevation of the game to the next level in terms of a community aspect. And this is what we're going to be doing. So I really hope you check that out as well. So without further ado, let's get on to the video, shall we? What is my favorite thing in terms of raiding that I have enjoyed doing in Final Fantasy 14? Now, it's a question I get a lot because of my extensive raiding background in World of Warcraft, where I played every class, I played every role, I did everything. We did it to a mythic raiding level consistently for like 12, 13 years, however long that game has been out. And now moving over to Final Fantasy 14, a lot of people are like, well, has anything changed? Because Final Fantasy raiding is so different to World of Warcraft. And you're seeing that with Echo currently trying to push through Dragon Song Ultimate, and if you've not been following that, you should, because it's an incredible experience of watching these top-of-the-line, currently world #1 raiders tackle what is now widely considered to be the most difficult challenge that Square Enix has ever put into Final Fantasy XIV. And it also goes hand in hand with just the weird situation where people try and compare apples to apples with Final Fantasy XIV and World of Warcraft, when they're very different experiences. The way these raids work is entirely different. Although it's still the tank, healer, DPS meta, the design and structure of those fights is massively different. How you play them is massively different. Mental exhaustion. We're talking about an enormous 22-minute long encounter from pull to finish that requires real intense understanding of how the game works mechanically. So we're talking much longer than something like the Jailer. It's been really cool to watch, and they're slowly getting towards the end, and they're looking to take probably another couple of weeks to down this fight. And people more from the World of Warcraft community I started to realize just how different FF raiding is. It's a very, very separate thing. And along my journey of playing Final Fantasy XIV, I have seen that diversion that Squeenix took, where they like started off with a bit of a WoW style all the way back in A Realm Reborn, where it's like, okay, our raids should be something similar to this because we know this works. And then they found their own style of doing things, and they're like, oh, it's actually... we're more like over here, and then they've embraced that and gone much further with it. So now this ultimate, literally by name, this ultimate exists, which is just like bringing raiders to tears, like on its defeat. That has happened many times for the world first raiders who did this, is that they were literally brought to tears at actually being able to overcome this challenge. And Squeenix has said they're probably going to pull back a little bit on the difficulty, and they maybe went a bit too far this time around, but using that and of course Final Fantasy XIV's intricate storytelling in order to merge that into their encounters so that you're reliving a part of their second best story, I would say, in my personal opinion, that they've ever done. So with that said, we're now in a situation where I'm trying things out and I'm working through it, and I'm going chronologically so I can follow this development path that Squeenix actually laid out for us. And I'm currently doing through the Shadowbringers. Now, Shadowbringers is a step up again from Stormblood because my focus has been on the extremes. This really works well for me as one-off encounters. Something I really hope they bring to World of Warcraft and Dragonflight is these one-off raid encounters. So things like your Onyxias, where you have like a group that goes and deals with a really individual tackling challenge. And the extremes for me are perfect rather than elongated raid progress. I'm going to go and do the like full-on savage raiding. That's in the future, along with the other ultimate encounters, which do exist. But right now, I've been doing the extremes. And the biggest question has always come back to is like, what is it you prefer? Do you prefer melee? Do you prefer range DPS? Do you prefer tanking? Because as you know, I tanked for like 10 years. It was my bread and butter in World of Warcraft. Tanking was my favorite thing to do when I had the levels of commitment to be the main tank, which means you have to be there every single time. You need to make that work for you. You need to be the reliant foundation for your guild, because if the tanks aren't there, you're kind of screwed. It's not something somebody can quickly step into if you're doing progress, for sure. But the extremes of where I've been enjoying things so much. And I kind of want to go through some of the extremes, especially the Stormblood ones, because my God, I did some of the extremes there that were just my absolute favorite I've done so far. And I'm told some later ones will be even better than that. But incidentally, one of my worst things to do in World of Warcraft, and the thing I always resented to do, was healing. Now, I healed in vanilla. I was a priest throughout classic World of Warcraft. We're talking vanilla World of Warcraft. I was a healer. I was a healer through a lot of the Burning Crusade, as I felt it was up to me to help my guild out and re-roll to that Holy Paladin on the Horde side when they finally came into the game, and be the Holy Paladin. But I didn't particularly enjoy it. I didn't really like the style. And my favorite healer that I've ever played in World of Warcraft in a raid setting has been a Discipline Priest. Like, a Discipline Priest really suits my needs. I liked that style of being much more predictive, of being like, I'm most effective when I can track a timer and know that in X seconds something is going to happen, and you get a ramp, which is what we call it in World of Warcraft, and you make these massive shields, and you'll know when I cast the Race to World First, I was following Dispriest, and certainly the latest one, I was following Ryzen, and I was following Azalea a lot, because watching that healing meter when they pull off their correct Dispriest actions and put all that preventative measures on players, it's just extraordinary. They'll go from like 5k healing per second to 30 to 32k in some environments. They'll just go boom, and they've just protected the whole raid. It's my favorite thing. Now, one thing I've discovered is when I was raiding, and there are certain times that my raid leader, Alex from Fat Boss, who's my raid leader, would call upon me as a balance druid to be the 6th healer if we ever needed it. So there were various encounters where that would happen, and so Queen Ashara would be an example, the Big Eyeball would be an example. It's like, Mike is our backup healer. N'Zoth, I healed N'Zoth, is like, that would be our 6th healer. And I was always like, it's kind of boring. I can't maximize it, which is a big focus of World of Warcraft. I can't really engage with it enough. I kind of just have to follow the pattern, know that damage comes here, and I throw out a few heals and things like that, and just kind of be a supportive role. And I generally wasn't something that I wanted to do long term. It would be always something I'd step into. I'd kind of have fun for like an hour or two, and then I'd be kind of bored and want to go back to DPS, where I can really fine tune where I'm going to use my cooldowns, how I'm going to use my movement abilities, how I'm going to really maximize how effective I can be in this part of the encounter, and that part of the encounter, and that part of the encounter. Now, Final Fantasy XIV, as I just said, works differently than that, right? It works differently than that. But Coincidentally enough, Final Fantasy 14 healing. I'm as shocked as anybody else. Is my favorite thing to do right now is actually heal. And I will push to heal whenever I get the opportunity. I'll DPS or I'll tank if nobody else is available to do it. But I have the same feelings about those as I did about healing in World of Warcraft. A complete flip and kind of a testament to how FF14's healing style is different. So what's different about it? What's made it like, so it's my favorite thing to do? Well, it's Final Fantasy XIV healing is a really, really fine-tuned balance. One of the things that kind of lost its way in World of Warcraft around about Wrath of the Lich King was that things like healer mana started to not count anymore, and you could start spamming, and then the meta of healing started to evolve into being much more spammy and constantly just going. Overhealing wasn't as big of a deal anymore, and in fact, it got less and less as time went on, so you could just really overheal a lot. And it wasn't too much of a problem. You would find a lot of guides or discussions which would be like, oh, well, you want to do X, Y, and Z in a row and then kind of just cycle through that because that will be the most effective output for your character. Now, there is nuance to that, certainly at the very high end with progression where mana does become into the issue, certainly if your gear is a little bit lower. But overall, healing became much more of an output-centric style of just constantly keep healing, pumping out of you, and account for things. Final Fantasy XIV doesn't work like that at all, and in fact has maintained, interestingly enough, and this comes down to some decisions which, on the face of it, I wouldn't ordinarily agree with, such as no talent trees, no real customization for your character in terms of how it plays. It's really down to what skills the game gives you, which enables it to really manage this fine-tooth comb of mana management and cooldown management. Because by keeping things relatively set, and also this plays very heavily into Final Fantasy XIV's adherence to being able to play any character at any level of the game. So it doesn't matter if you're a capped character, you may get thrown into a dungeon that's like level 30, right? So you're a level 90 character, you queue up for a dungeon, and the way that games work is like permanent time walking, where it will send you down to being a level 30 character, for example. Now, part of the design philosophy that Final Fantasy XIV implements is that your character should still be relatively playable and understandable to anybody. So you probably, for the most part, can now in World of Warcraft, because the way they design things now, and certainly with the new talent trees coming in Dragonflight, this will be much more apropos to how they're going to manage this going forward. And I can almost see that this is setting up the ability to have a similar system to Final Fantasy XIV, because you get most of your base abilities now very, very early. Now, you did do that a little bit back over the last few years in WoW, but they're pushing it now so that it's very common. It's like when you click a spec, you will have like the base toolkit, and then all the extra nuts and bolts and stuff and extra cooldowns and stuff will come quite a bit later. And now we're going to be, I think that's where WoW is going to try and implement, because it's a good system, because what it does is enables players of all levels, whether they be brand new players or people who are leveling, to have a good access to a pool of players who are able to join into their dungeons, massively reduces dungeon queue times, etc., 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 right? It really helps out. So your tanks aren't just doing, your tanks don't all bunch up at endgame very quickly, because tanks and stuff get much quicker queues, and the guys in lower leveling dungeons kind of have to start waiting a lot more till somebody else is leveling a tank or a healer, etc. Now you have access to everybody who's currently playing the game and queuing for a dungeon. So what I found with the FF14 healing is they basically design nearly every major moment of a fight. In general, this is a very, nebulous concept, but in general to happen at sort of strict timers. And then what they can do is, because most players have similar sort of timers in terms of their cooldowns and ability cooldowns, is that pairs up really nicely with things going correctly. Right? So we're edging more into Disc Priest style, which is if things are going correctly and you can set up for what should be the major scary moments, you can be very, very effective. Where Disc Priests tend to fall down, and similar to Final Fantasy XIV, is when things start going wrong and you have to start spot healing and you start transferring back to that just churn out health scenario, then it doesn't quite work. Because the way Final Fantasy XIV's mana management and stuff works is that once you start having to do stuff outside of the norm, outside of people playing correctly, players are very heavily punished for that. Very heavily punished for that. And therefore, you have to start doing a lot of extra healing, a lot of extra output spells that ordinarily you wouldn't do. And that suddenly starts having a dramatic effect on your character's performance. Using a cooldown in the wrong place can have a really detrimental effect to what's going on in the next 30 seconds. And you can feel that heavily. Certainly if you have to start resurrecting people, because of course every healer has the ability to res people in combat, as do some of the DPS, but those players are punished by doing very diminished damage for the next minute or so after they've been res. But you can continue to progress. But that mana cost is excessive. It's really excessive. So they heavily punish you for things going wrong during the more difficult encounters. But if things are going right, you have a really good experience. Now, both of these things are fun, which is what I've really started to enjoy, because the same rules apply when learning this. And if you've watched any of my guides over the last 10 or 12 years, you'll know that when it comes to learning how to tank and learning how to heal, if you really want to do those things, you have to get into shit situations. You have to get yourself completely smashed up, because if things are going perfectly, actually not that much of a learning experience. You will learn something. You will learn how to manage cooldowns for the big moment. You will learn how to easily take care of the tank. But if you're playing with a really good tank, they take less damage than a bad tank in general. If you're playing with really good DPS, they'll be able to manage their DPS and not take aggro. They'll not stand in nonsense, so they'll take less damage, etc., etc. Which then frees you up to another style of Final Fantasy XIV, which I really like in their healing, is that every single healer is kind of built from the ground up to be a DPS, like very closely second. Very closely second. They have a multitude of DPS spells. Now, I know you're going to say, World of Warcraft is the same, right? Right, but their style is generally pushed towards the high end. Like, expecting really good healer DPS is something we see in much higher Mythic Plus. We see it in early Mythic Plus as well, but it's kind of mixed in. It's something that a lot of healers don't do as much, certainly in early Mythic Plus and early raids. And I know for myself, like, I've played with some raiders even at the Mythic level who don't really look for really, really opportune ways of pumping DPS. In FF14, though, that's the basis of it, because a lot of tanks can self-heal themselves to the point where you don't really focus on the tanks. And I found that really shocking. When I first healed an extreme fight, I was like, right, so I need to start spamming the tanks, right? No, not really. If the tanks are playing correctly, the tanks kind of take care of themselves outside of tank busters, outside of specific moments where the tank's going to take a tremendous amount of damage. And for the most part, you can kind of leave the tanks for themselves, and they'll be fine. And you'll know when you're progressing, it's like, oh, this is a moment of heavy tank damage, and that's when you adjust your character to be ready for that, and things go really smoothly. And you can use your mana-free spells to manage that. I'm currently playing Scholar, by the way, as my primary thing, but I have played a little Astrologian, and that's going to be my next one. I haven't played a White Mage yet. I want to try that out as well. But this DPS focus is really important, because every global cooldown matters, as it does in both games. So you find yourself DPSing, and then really sort of planning. It's like, okay, I have these very effective spells that are very cheap. That's where this mana management comes in. You've got these super cheap, very effective spells. When do I want to use those? Because if I manage those correctly, I'm fine for the encounter. I'll finish the fight probably on full mana, and unlike WoW, where we always used to say, is like, you should aim to finish the fight at 0 mana, because that means you've used every tool in the arsenal. Over here, it's more a case of you should try and finish the fight like full mana, because if you do, your team has played well and things have gone correctly. And what this also enables, which is something that I really love, is it allows a lot more personal mechanics to happen to the healers. Because if things are going well, you're kind of just an extra DPSer, which means we can throw a lot more interesting mechanics your way. Because instead of like trying to find a way for the healers to plant and heal, if you're doing things correctly, then you don't need to do that. You should have access to all the instant cast and mana-free spells and things like that that enable you to simply throw out some gentle healing, which should cover everybody else doing things correctly. You see what I mean? There's a very distinct difference there, which I found really fun, because it's like I get to play a DPS, I get to deal with the mechanics, but I also get to do this extra support, which is to pre-plan how I'm going to utilize my cooldowns, to have that little bit of maximization. I'm not perfect at it yet by any means. I need a lot more practice. But in that regard, it has easily been my favorite thing that I've been doing in Final Fantasy XIV, and a strange focus of mine going forward as I finish capping one of every role is my next goal isn't to try out more tanks. Now, I've done some tanking. I was kind of bored. Like, the tanking just wasn't that interesting to me. I've done DPS on both. It's fine, but I'm more focused on just pressing my buttons correctly for the most part, because I'm doing the same mechanics that I would do as a healer. Do you see my point? I'm not gaining much more by being a melee or DPSer. I'm just kind of maximizing my button presses for the most part, which is fine. There's good fun to be had there. I don't dislike it. But when I'm healing, God, I'm having so much fun. I'm having so much crazy fun. And I would definitely put a message out as like, if you've shied away from that, because one common message I've had since the start of ever making my channel is that people like get afraid of healing because you can let people down. People are afraid of tanking because you can let people down, or if you mess up, all the focus is on you. And if I've had some toxic experiences, you know, where the tank has just forgot to put on his threat modifier, or something like that, and has let mobs run wild and hit everybody. This happened like 3 days ago, actually, and like a DPS is dying, I'm getting killed because I'm healing everybody, and then being like, why did you die? Like, you should be, it's not my fault in the tank. It's like, well, yeah, it absolutely is your fault. You know, it absolutely is your fault. But having those moments also enabled me to use my instant cast in a different way, to figure out how to fix these solutions, and all that has been so enjoyable that every time I get an opportunity right now, I'm healing in FF14, and it's such a twist in terms of gameplay orientation that I have from World of Warcraft that I felt I should talk about it, and hopefully encourage some of you guys to have a play around with it too. All right, guys, so thank you. I hope to see you at PreachCon if you're coming, and I definitely hope to see you come to our PvP tournament. I think it's going to be a really fun day. I hope you guys enjoy it, and I'll see you again. Bye, everybody.